Gold is absolutely ripping right now, but is this just yet again another massive warning for not just Canada, but the global economy? Well, let's go back and look at past history to see if we can kind of gauge the probabilities of what's going to happen here. So first of all, let's revisit 2020. And as you'll note from this chart and the highlighted area, gold was ripping higher right before the apex of the crisis in terms of financial markets, which was around March in 2020. And then gold took a massive hit as it was sold because of hedge funds getting margin calls, needing to sell anything that is liquid, and gold is always liquid. Now let's flip back to 2008 and exactly the same thing happened. Gold surged before the crisis. It went up over 40%. And then when the crisis hit, it went down near 40% as well. So gold is known, actually, at least for the past two crisis events in financial markets where we've had the quantitative easing that we've seen over the past 10 to 15 years. And this quantitative easing is of note because when the Fed and the Bank of Canada and all these central banks started doing quantitative easing, this kind of changed the dynamics of financial markets as we've seen, and they've become pretty much entirely speculative. And that is exactly why you see stock markets at all-time high right now. That is not because they're an accurate representation of the economy. That is not because they're an accurate representation of companies' earnings. It is because of the pure speculation and hype that is in the market. So what's really interesting is gold surging is not necessarily a good thing. Now, many of you that have watched this channel will know that I believe in gold, and I think gold is an insurance policy. I think you should hold gold because it helps you sleep at night, because really when you look at any event where financial markets have been hit or where the currency has been debased, typically gold does extremely well in those environments. In fact, one example that we have very recently is going back to 2022 when the gilt market blew up in the UK. What happened to gold prices? Well, they went up. So anybody holding gold through that period in the UK was much better off than those who weren't, because what happened is when the currency took a massive hit, because yes, fiat currencies can fall really fast. I remember making that video on that day where the pound was down nearly 5% in one day. And in fact, it was really in the space of just a couple of hours. Pound plunges below $1.11, FTSE 100 slides, and UK bonds tumble. And that crazy volatility can definitely come into currencies. Now, here's the thing when it comes to the Canadian dollar, where it gets really interesting, is the Canadian dollar has kind of been in a range now for over 2 years against the US dollar. It's gone up, it's gone down, but it's really been in this wide range that I've been tracking. And that is very interesting because generally when you're in a range, you are waiting for a big move that's going to happen. In fact, very similar to this was what was happening in the pound prior to that gilt market blow up. Now, I don't think it's going to be the same thing as in the UK, but we don't know what it's going to be. All we can do is look at the risks, and the risks within the financial system and the banking system are completely insane. So you have the government debt, which I think is of least worries, because as far as the government's concerned, they can just print money to their heart's extent. They have no problems there. But when it comes to the consumer and when it comes to businesses, those are the major problems. You see, people think of banks as these institutions that are really good at holding your money and they're really rock solid. The way I look at a banking system is who have they mostly loaned money to and how likely are those people to pay it back? I mean, it's not just like they can just lend out money to anybody and they can just say, oh, they're not paying us back. That's no problem, because the the banks, we know, sell on that debt through different mechanisms and securitizations, which I won't get into on this video. So once you understand that, you realize the bank has a liability to pay somebody else for all the debt that it lends out. So the banks, when they create credit, they're obviously doing it mostly in Canada for businesses and also consumers. And we know that business bankruptcies are absolutely skyrocketing right now. And the trend doesn't look good, guys, does it? I mean, the chart just does not look good. It looks horrific. There's no sugarcoating this. There's nothing I can say that will make this better, but it doesn't look good. So when you've got a high, massive amount of debt when it comes to private businesses, that creates a huge problem. And then you go and look at the household side of the equation. So the household side of the equation is even worse off because the households, their income is shrinking and we are in a depression. And let me explain why we're in this depression right now. Real GDP per capita is falling. Real incomes are falling at a rate that we've never seen before since the Great Depression. And coupled with that, you've got a cost of living crisis, which we've never seen. I mean, the cost of living crisis is completely insane. There are different pressures that have really made this a lot worse, like the mass migration plan from the government and the government's plan to just increase immigration as a housing crisis and cost of living crisis persists for average Canadians. And I will note that no politician is coming out and saying that they're going to massively cut immigration. When we're in this depression that we're in right now, a mental health crisis, Canadians can't afford to eat, there's unbelievable amounts of people going to food banks. Does that give you confidence in the banks who have lent out literally trillions, more money than the entire money supply just for mortgages? Just for mortgages. I'm not talking about credit card debt and even the financial engineering product of the home equity line of credit. I am talking about just mortgage debt. Mortgage debt has absolutely skyrocketed in Canada along with home prices because unlike most people will tell you, Canada is in a massive housing bubble. How do we know this? Because incomes have not grown at the rate the debt has grown. So people are multiplying their income more and more, and whether they're using some assets to back that or not, it just makes a recipe for disaster when prices drop dramatically, which is exactly what we've seen in Canada. So it's no wonder that you're starting to see banks pull back on lending right now and kind of think, maybe we don't want to lend to you. Everything apart from, you guessed it, their special sauce, which is mortgages. Mortgages are about the only thing that the banks are willing to lend for right now, and the government is actively encouraging it by actually putting liquidity into the markets by the CMB program, buying these risky mortgages and then saying to the banks, hey, you go out and lend more money, all at a time when the country is in a literal depression. And nobody is going to say this to you. Nobody is going to say that Canada's in a depression. I mean, God, the mainstream media won't even say that we're in a recession despite what you see. I mean, it is just unbelievable. It's like some people just drive around all day with their eyes closed. There are people dying on our streets all over the place. There is a mental health crisis. I mean, if you just talk to people, then you understand pretty quickly the dire situation that this country is in. And the problem is there's not going to be drastic change with political leadership. I believe that we have political parties that are very similar, albeit they try and act like they are very different. And I believe that this is going to create a lost decade, which is actually what some institutions in Canada are even saying is going to happen. So remember, when somebody asks you whether you think the banking system is solid, the question is actually, do you think private businesses and the consumer is solid? And in a depression, it would be naive to say yes. One thing that you can do that is totally free is have a plan of what you're going to do if you lose income, lose a job, if you fall on hard times, and have a financial plan, know your budget, know what your outgoings are, and know what money is coming in. And that is just one thing that you can do to prepare that is totally free. And by the way, Most people, they're not going to do that. So anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, I would highly recommend that you check out this video here. And if you're looking for a VPN to get around all the censorship, I can't believe I'm saying that, in Canada, go to expressvpn.com/marketmania. I will see you on the next one. Take care.